Tasmanian Liberal Senator Claire Chandler is attempting to garner support for her Save Women's Sports bill that would allow sporting organisations the option to exclude transgender women from competing in female sports. Senator Chandler says in her bill, which has received support, I'm thrilled and pleased to say, congratulations, Scott Morrison, support from the Prime Minister, comes down to whether women and girls have the right to play single-sex sport, but it has been met with fierce backlash by those who claim the bill is transphobic or discriminatory. Senator Claire Chandler joins us now. Welcome to the show, Senator.
Thanks for having me, Rowan.
Great to see you. So talk us through, why you brought forward the bill. You've worked in this area for a long time. You've done sensational work. You've been an absolute standout and inspiration to so many women. We call it on this show the war on women. And what has happened in sport is just one aspect of it. Tell us why you came to put forward the bill and how you hope it will go forward. And, of course, receiving the support of the Prime Minister is a great help.
So my bill just ensures that women and girls have the right to access single-sex sport. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where, under current interpretations of the Sex Discrimination Act, our local sporting clubs, from the community level right through to the elite level, can have legal action taken against them if they choose to operate single-sex sport for women. And we have a set of guidelines that was issued by Sport Australia a couple of years ago now that clearly say that inclusion in sport should be on the basis of gender identity rather than biological sex. And that's just an untenable position because it means that women can be forced to play against males. And we all know that there are obvious fairness and safety implications if that's the case. Since I've been advocating for this issue, there's been a whole wealth of research that's been developed by sports scientists, doctors, the experts, that clearly demonstrates these fairness and safety concerns. And so when it became clear to me that Sport Australia wasn't going to reissue their guidelines until the Sex Discrimination Act changed, I thought, well, as a senator, it is within my power to develop a private senator's bill to create that change that should hopefully, if passed, ensure that women and girls in Australia have the right to access single-sex sport.
Well,
Rita.
that's an absolute right. There's a reason we've got different categories, and when we don't, it's women who suffer. Now, I've noticed that the Prime Minister's support for your bill has already been characterised as some sort of anti-trans, transphobic stance. It is so utterly false. But do you see that causing damage to the Prime Minister coming up to the election? Because that is a narrative that many in the media also are keen to push.
I certainly don't think it will be damaging at all, Rita. Like I say, my bill is about ensuring women and girls have the right to access single-sex sport. And it doesn't stop sports from offering other forms of competitions that facilitate inclusion for everybody, whether that's a mixed category or a social category or an open competition. There are still going to be those options available for sports to develop, to ensure that everyone can get involved in whatever their sport may be. But it really frustrates me when people characterise the work that I've been doing and the bill that I've been developing in this way and say, oh, well, this isn't really a problem. We need to see some examples. Why aren't women complaining about this? Women are complaining about this. I'm contacted every week by parents of girls, female sports people, competitors from the grassroots level right up to the elite level, and they are all concerned about the way that women's sport has been eroded, whether it's them being forced to compete against biological males on the playing field or just being threatened with some sort of disciplinary action by their sporting club for speaking out. This is happening, but these women and mums and dads contact me because they feel that they can't speak out. And you only have to look at what happens to the people who do to know why that's the case. So I've seen death threats and rape threats issued against women on Twitter that have advocated on these matters. I myself was dragged before the Anti-Discrimination Commission in Tasmania 18 months ago just for writing a piece in my local newspaper advocating for these positions. So there are real consequences for women who speak out. We need more women speaking out, and we need to have that volume of voices in there out in the community so that they're not shouted down. But I can completely understand why people do feel scared to speak out. The way that elements of the media and the vocal minority will shout them down is a really sad reflection on public debate in this country.
James.
Senator, I want to ask you, and apologies for mentioning a name that's going to horrify many of our viewers on a Sunday morning, but Peter Fitzsimons, the Sydney Morning Herald columnist, recently wrote an op-ed in which he said, this isn't a big deal. It's only been a couple of trans Olympians, so what problem is this trying to solve? Now, you spoke before about community sport and, at more amateur levels. Try and quantify the problem for us. How much are you hearing about this being on other levels? And what do you do about, organizations? I know Cricket Australia a couple of years ago came out and issued an inclusion policy on all of this. So if sporting bodies are determined to push through with this political interpretation of gender, what does this bill do to stop that?
Well, first of all, I was pretty shocked by the commentary from Peter Fitzsimons saying that this isn't a problem when we have a swimmer in the United States, Leah Thomas, entering swim meets with, she's a trans woman, biological male, identifies as female, competing against young women at a college level and blitzing them in the pool by 7 seconds, where we've had Laurel Hubbard compete at the Olympics, taking the place of a female in the women's weightlifting. This is absolutely happening, and it's only reasonable that Australian mums and dads and women are looking at this and are worried about the ramifications that this is going to have on their sport. But honestly, I hear about these concerns from the elite level, like I've just mentioned with Laurel Hubbard and Leah Thomas, and we know that this is happening in Australia right down to the community level, and mums and dads in particular saying that their daughters have eventually decided not to participate in their chosen sport because they're being forced to compete against young boys who clearly have some advantages over them on the sporting field. And so if you can't get it right at the community level, we're not going to be able to have women's sport at the elite level in the same way that we have become used to in this country, because women are going to become discouraged and will feel that there's not a place for them.
Senator, you're 100% correct, and I would say the opposite or invert what Rita was saying earlier. I think this is the sort of thing that will win you the next election. This is what the Liberals need to be standing for. This is the sort of thing that Scott Morrison can hold up and say, you vote for us and we will fight for you. Grassroots Australians, mums and dads who care for their daughters, who will fight against this insanity, which we know the Labor Party are absolutely embedded with and embrace wholeheartedly. So well done. If the Libs win the election, I'm giving it to you, Claire. You've done it. You've stood up there and you've fought the fight for values that all Australians care for. So well done. Now, I want to say the tide is turning on this rubbish. In Sweden, for example, ultra-woke, ultra-left Sweden, the National Board and Health and Welfare Office is making a complete U-turn, Claire, regarding hormone treatment for minors with gender dysphoria. And they have reached the conclusion that we said, and you've been saying for years, we've said for years on this show, that the risks far outweigh the benefits. That's the authority saying that in Sweden now. What do you make of that, Claire?
Well, I think that these are some really interesting developments that we're seeing on the front of how we're treating children with gender dysphoria in Europe. And like you alluded to, Rowan, previously there have been some quite what I would describe as extreme ways of treating these children in Europe, and we're seeing them backtrack on those treatment programs now, particularly I think because of the Keira Bell case in the United Kingdom, which found that these sort of treatments of young children, cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers are experimental at best, and we don't know the long-term effects of them. So I'm very pleased to see the scrutiny that's been applied to these treatments in Europe. I would like to see that same scrutiny applied to the way these treatments are happening in Australia. We know that there has been an explosion in the number of children being treated for gender dysphoria in this country in the last 5 to 10 years. And I have made many attempts to get out of state government health departments the data which shows what type of treatments these children are receiving, what the pathways are for these children in terms of clinical pathways, what other treatments are they receiving later down the track, and also what other consideration has been given to these children having other mental health issues that might need to be worked through before we resort to cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, double mastectomies, all of these sorts of very extreme treatments. And it's been very difficult to get that information out of our state health departments. And honestly, I think it's a national scandal that we aren't asking more questions about the way our health system is treating children in this situation. I mean, obviously there are some very complex mental health issues that these young children have, and I'd like to see those more holistically worked through before we resort to putting hormones into these children, giving them double mastectomies, sort of life-altering treatments that we don't know the impacts of further down the track.
Claire Chandler, Senator Claire Chandler from Tasmania. That roaring sound you hear in your ears is Australians across this nation, mums and dads, cheering and saying, yes, well done. Don't listen to the naysayers, whatever you do. You carry on fighting. Australia is behind you. And as I say, if the Liberals win the election, it's thanks to people like you in particular. Claire Chandler, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders this morning.
Thanks for having me, everyone.